Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us tonight. I'm very excited to have my new friend, John Kryder, come and visit with us. I met him at the Dog-Eared Bookstore, I believe, and enjoyed his book very much. And I'm thrilled that all of you are here. I wish that those of you are online were here with us because we have some lovely wine and some great cookies. But maybe next month you'll join us here in person. But in the meantime, I'm going to turn things over. I should share my name first of all. It's Mary Koza, for those of you who don't know me. And I've been working on this book club since 2011, when one of our former docents, she's deceased now, but Jane Roubaix, decided to read all the books that Charles Birchfield read. And that's how we started the book club. But it didn't take us too long to figure out we should be reading books written by authors in our community, which supports our mission here at the Birchfield Penny Art Center. And so that's what we've been doing. And since 2011, believe it or not, we have welcomed over 90 authors. It's pretty exciting to have such a vibrant community here in Buffalo, New York. But I'm done talking. I'm going to turn things over to my friend and fellow docent, Marilee Keller, who's going to introduce tonight's authors. So Marilee, all yours.
I'm very fortunate to have Mary to always make me feel so homely, but like at home when I come here. I do feel homely compared to Mary. I am. It's much more beautiful than me, but that's okay. I've been a docent at the Albright Knox for 40 years. So when it closed, we had the opportunity to come over here and get involved. And I haven't done very many things. COVID did provide an excuse, but getting to know Mary's and the idea of this book club really is a real positive. So when I saw they were looking for a facilitator for a writer named John Kryder, there's poetry everywhere. I thought, I think I would like to do that. And so after I talked to John and then got this book on friendship, I realized this is really challenging because it's prose and poetry. It's not just a story with characters and settings. So I don't know how good I'll be at it, but your questions and your comments would really be appreciated by me as well as John, I'm sure. So I'll just say a couple things. John's interest in poetry, interdisciplinary studies, and prison education are among those that drive his reading, writing, and teaching. He co-founded and for 18 years co-directed the Buffalo-Williamsville Poetry, Music, Dance, and Art Celebration. As you know, I really found that very interesting. I went to one of those, they're amazing. Also the Buffalo-Williamsville let's see, where are we here? Okay, he for 10 years contributed to the Potomac Journal of Poetry and Politics. His poems have been set to music by high school, college, and professional musicians, including Hymn for Spring, which is part of Albany Records. We have to say that. And O Stable Star from the Jubal Press, composed by Stephen Shewan, who we read about in the book. John taught at Attica, Wyoming prison in the Consortium of the Niagara Frontier, and his involvement in prisoner advocacy groups motivates and informs his academic work. And I enjoyed reading that too. He now teaches Freshman English and Honors seminar and the Law and Literature and Journey in American Literature courses at Canisius College. He has a number of awards.
We don't need to go there.
They always have a lot of titles when it's an award. They can't just say the this award and that award. I like the Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra Award for Excellence in Music Education from 2006. But the most recent is the Adjunct Faculty Teaching Award, April 2020. It's a good one. I like that. Yeah. Any other one I should point out?
Well, the only thing I would say to that is that colleagues from Canisius are here, and it is to them and to colleagues like Gina online and so forth that I owe so much to any work I've done in teaching. And actually, this book came out of the Canisius faculty writing workshops during the January term. So Many thanks.
Actually, that was going to be my first question.
Sorry.
No, it's fine because I would really want to hear more from you. So this book on friendship, I think was published 2021. And I hope that you have had a chance to read through it. And basically, I think, John, I'd like for you to continue to tell us about the making of this book and the art, prose and poetry is what you referred to when I initially talked to you about it.
Right. No, I think I go back to Canisius and the faculty writing retreats as giving me the opportunity to think about it. And when I first was thinking about writing on friendship, it wasn't that it would be a little book like this, maybe an essay or two, but I think the book had been working in me for years. And it all goes back to and I'm just going to show the picture of Erwin Leader, my art teacher in high school, used to say well, he said it once and once was enough. But, and Gina, maybe you remember Irv Leader. Oh, sorry. At any rate, and I would quote him to students afterwards in my teaching career, but it took me back as a young person, 15 years old, 16 years old, when you're worried about friendship and how many friends you have and being popular and things like that. And Irv said, if you can count all the friends you have on one hand and have a few fingers left over, you're a lucky man. And as I say in the book, man was an inclusive term for him, a la Emerson and Amanda Gorman, as she made clear, at Biden's inauguration. So, and it was such an expansive opening in my mind to what friendship was. Not that I didn't know something of that from my parents and others who had taught me about friendship, but Irv distilled that. And he was a gracious and wonderful and open-minded and caring teacher who taught way more than art, and he taught art as well as it can be taught. So I think that, and Mike DiGiacomo, whom some of you know well, Mike DiGiacomo, when I gave him a copy of the book, he's a wonderful friend, former student who has taught me more than I've ever taught him, I'm sure. But he said, I remember you saying that to us, as students, because I think friendship is friend is a word, and friendship is a word that gets, as John Freeman says in Dictionary of the Undoing, it gets vandalized. He says our language is being vandalized, and he goes through the alphabet A through Z and picks a word for each letter in the alphabet. After reading his book, that further sort of connected with, well, wait a minute. And it was after I started writing, like, I want to redefine this word. I want to reclaim it. I want to give it a sensibility that I think has been brutalized in our culture. As so many words are being brutalized. Again, a la John Freeman, our language is being vandalized, he says. And so that was part of the initiative the initiative to write the book. And then this little book on happiness I talk about it in the opening of the book, but my father gave that to me Christmas 1975. And it's just a Teilhard de Chardin. And it's just quintessentially, I call it in the book, a little big book. My book is a little book, but there are little, there are little big books. This is his on love. Thankfully more and more books by, astonishing authors are being written. People like Tim Snyder on tyranny. Tim's a historian at Yale University. Notes on Grief by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. It's just astounding. And, I think I was drawn to wanting to capture what Irv taught me and also what that means for me at this stage in my life, but also for what the word means and could mean if it's reclaimed for anybody of any age. I didn't want to write a book. Yeah, I'm 67. Like, okay, here's the old guy's book on friendship. Right? I wanted to avoid that. I don't want to write the old, that kind of book. And actually, again, with these wonderful colleagues that are here tonight, Simone Ryder was one of the students at Canisius who read the book. Also, Isa Hashmi and Steph Wetzel, and they said, no, this is current for all different ages. And that was my goal. And in that regard too, and I won't take too much more time on this, but I didn't want it to be a long book. I mean, Bob Butler read it as well before and gave me some thoughts. And, I think one could write a pretty long book on friendship. And there are books out there on friendship of writers and people in all sorts of, fields, medicine and so forth. But I wanted it to be something that I could give to friends. And if it went farther than that, great. But I had it printed at dual printing, which Nick and Canisius, of course, let me know about through the literary magazine at Canisius, the Quadrangle. So I was very fortunate in that. So that gives you a little bit of the background.
So can you get into a little more description about how it was set up? Because that was immediately a surprise. I mean, prologue, yes, it's okay. But then we get into just a title on one hand.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's the first chapter, but I would say it
that
probably
is. Yeah, that is.
And some of them are very short.
Yep.
In fact, most of them are short. Some are really short.
Mhm.
I like that little book word that you used for describing those books. So was the way that you set this up thought out a lot? Or did you just sort of look back in time? Well, obviously you wanted to refer to what your first inspiration was for this idea.
Well, that's what I first wrote about, and I had no thought of a book. But as Mick said to me so wonderfully in what he wrote after I had given him a copy, he called it my ode to Mr. Leader, which is what I wanted it to be. And then as I kept writing, I got a shape from it. And I end with, particularly looking at Alan Batchelder, my economics professor from college, Melanie and Dennis Hodge, our daughter Kira's godparents, and then Abood Sam, Father Sam of Father Sam's Bread, if you know Father Sam's Bread, he's a close friend and so forth. So I wanted to get to sort of redefining, which also involves in the fourth chapter, what I call the non-friend, because I think friendship, as I say there, and I'll just read this one little section.
Page 12.
It says,
No, not page 12.
I say,
Yes, 12.
what friendship is not is as important as what it is. And so it's easy to say, oh, somebody's my friend. But what about when somebody's your friend and something happens that undercuts that very notion? And how do we know what that is and so forth? And so I tried to define it first, friendship first, as much as I see it, and then get into some exemplary stories about friendship that have been moving for me, and then get into people. And Don Scalfani, you could have been one of the sections here. I mean, Tom O'Malley is, and I'm going to read something I wrote about Tom. who's become a wonderful friend.
Wait, a minute, I gotta have Meg leave.
Could you just tell us the page you're on?
Yeah, I'm on page 30.
Okay.
And, you know, can I pass books out for people?
Sure.
Yeah, that would be
Okay.
good.
Your night, John, you can do whatever you like.
So, can you open that up for me?
While he's doing that, I have to say that, we went to the same high school. We went to Williamsville High School, but I was, 8 years ahead of them. And I did know Mr. Leader because I also took a lot of art classes. I actually took the 5 that you needed for a New York State Regents major in art. That's the other typical math, science, French. And I just couldn't believe that when I started reading this, that Mr. Leader's name came up. And that I actually was right in the classroom while I'm reading this, picturing Mr. Leader and his interaction with 15-year-old John Kryder. Was it 19? What year was that?
What was that? I'm sorry.
What year were you in South that you had?
71,
Okay.
1971.
Yeah, I was even married then. I was really old. So these kinds of things came up periodically for me personally, which was really actually kind of shocking to think that we overlapped in some of the difference, and the fact that it started with the art classes.
Yeah.
So it's really, and that it meant so much to you because that's what I ended up majoring in, which is probably why I'm here, because of my art background and my love of art. See how we all connect?
Well, I've got another piece about the art that I'll get to, but but on page 30, I'm in this section, I'm talking, it's the section I entitled etymology, and just talking about, the meaning of words, how words get defined, how they change and so forth. And I won't go through that, but and then I talk about my brother, Tom, and his great friends from Syracuse. And I talk about my son, Nicholas, and his great friends, not just from high school days or before, but afterwards as well. And then I end that section talking about my sister Kate's friends. But I want to get to the point about Tom O'Malley and how much I appreciate and love him as a friend. So at any rate, I'm talking about my son Nick and his group of friends with whom I've just spent a week. They let me come and join them up in Canada when they go up. And Katie's been, Doria's been, but not recently. Like Tom and his friends, Nick and his discuss and argue, bring the worst and best to one another to share and deliberate, to live deliberately a la Thoreau, though unlike him, they gather in the woods together. As my colleague and good friend Tom O'Malley reminds me, living deliberately can set you free. Their liberating friendship, their honesty and admiration and challenging the best in each other, quite a wonder beyond a wonder to behold. And they bring others into their closeness, invite others, not just family, into their togetherness in inspiring and expansive openness. While not, of course, in either Tom's or Nick's close groups, heart to heart as they are, they have made me a sort of honorary part of the inimitable world they share. And in that part, from my perspective and their gifts to me, I know and feel more deeply what friendship truly is. It is as if I were on the moon orbiting around the earth of their closeness, and from that vantage point, absorb the brilliant color of their friendship's solidity. Or to put it another way, as if in my solo spacecraft, like an Apollo 13, am able, due only to their care, to enter a world of hope they open up through the blazing atmospheric pressure, where when I land in the sea, they pick me up and invite me in from those vast waters to share times with them around the fires and feasts of their closeness. And Tom captured that with living deliberately can set you free. And so he had the prologue to that little section, which I otherwise wouldn't have been able to write, for sure.
Yeah, I use that. That's one of my shticks I use with my students. And when I say talk about thorough and, especially that living deliberately and because the word liberate is in there and also deliberate when you think about things. So it has a lot of, and I think Thoreau is well aware of that. And so, as we travel through with our friends and through the world, they help us to deliberate about what we're seeing and what we're experiencing. And, and with our friendship too, I mean, with John, I did like, before I retired from St. Francis in what was it? Yeah, 4 years ago, 2019. And, but I'd always taught a couple of classes a semester at Canisius College. And I had a chance to teach Mary. I was teaching grad courses for during the 90s. And Mary was my best student ever. Really was.
Sorry about that, but thank you.
And she was nice enough not to correct me in front of the kids. but that's something that it's just so wonderful when you understand that, and I think Thoreau was getting at that too. Everybody thinks he just lived by himself and didn't talk to anybody, and that's BS. It's not true at all. And so he had a lot of friends, and he did a lot of things with his friends, and he went to Maine, for example, and the Maine woods and climbed mountains with other friends, and stuff like that. So, and that's what John and I kind of did. We climbed little mountains in South Buffalo,
That's great.
and solved pretty much all the troubles of the world.
It was impressive to me to think that you were able to be part of this gang of your son's friends, that it's impressive they brought you in, but I actually really found that part to be one of the many touching, well, there were many of them, but I found that really touching in particular to think of, probably because I was a little jealous because my children never included me. Maybe for a short trip, but certainly not in that setting. That's really very intimate because it wasn't like you had museums to go to or other games to play. I mean, you just were really doing a lot of talking, I would imagine, and listening.
There's a lot of talk, right, Katie? There's a lot of talk. It's great talk.
Well, for talking, there has to be listeners too.
Exactly.
It was great. That was touching. Going back to the non-friend chapter. So you have the title. At first, I didn't realize that it was a new chapter because it's in small letters. Maybe you can pronounce it better. Nada y pues nada. Nada y pues nada.
Right.
The non-friend. Did you make that word up, non-friend?
I don't know if I made it up, but
Did you sort in?
the sort of nothing from nothing kind of idea with people that we sometimes consider friends, or according to the culture around us and forces like social media and expectations in employment or going to a school or being on a team and thinking, oh, well, then I'll for sure have friends. That doesn't always happen. And in fact, I think it's, again, I'm getting back to what Irv Leader said about friendship as rare. And that doesn't mean that I'm not trying to say, there's you can't have a goodly number of friends. I think I am blessed with a goodly number of friends beyond what I well deserve, that's for sure. But it's paradoxical. So that's why I had this chapter out called the digital anatomy, because I was trying to pick up on Irv's idea about the one hand and what does that really mean? Like, and the way I put it is, I've no doubt subconsciously played the numbers game about the one hand, wondered about two versus a few, and realized rarity isn't circumscription. It lives in paradox, given the friends I know, I have and trust, those I go to with regularity, or as occasion or trauma encourage in spirit and in the flesh with silent or audible words. But I think oftentimes, again, and it's my attempt to sort of make this word more alive than I think it's been, is that there are expectations about friendship that are misleading, and acquaintanceship or proximity being a part of a political party. You might have the same goals in mind, but you can have somebody in your own party you're not friends with at all. You could say you're friends in the politics of it all, but you might be battling all the time personally and not even have a connection that way. So trying to get to that idea of it, it's okay to not think that in every situation in which we're involved, again, teams, professions, and so forth, that everybody we work with is going to be a friend. That takes the word, I think, out of what it really means. That was my attempt. That is my attempt to try to explain that. And so I won't, getting to your question, Marilee, I won't go through that section. It's not that long, but I'll read this. Many of those on page 14, many of those we work with, the vast majority in some cases, may be people we like and admire in terms of what they do and how. Some may be people we do not like, though we recognize they possess positive qualities and some obviously strong or capable skill sets. All of these people good and earnest, and even more, yet not friends. Realizing who we can call our friends and who we cannot. The non-friends. And again, it sounds so non-friends, it sounds so canceling. I don't mean it in a kind of culture canceling way. I mean it more in a clarifying way. Requires insight and arduous attention, often entails dearly bought experience and careful understanding, and demands of us a bedrock decency and beneficent vision towards all whom we encounter and work with, and with whom we learn that makes us more reflective and more human, more positive and sensitive and awake, whatever the labor, whatever the hour, whatever the place. Because I wouldn't want to be false in friendships.
Mhm.
And so I think part of that section gets to, a particular person I had in mind as a false friend, for sure.
Mhm.
But that's not that unusual that we have experiences with people where we think they're very close for us and would be there for us if we really needed them. And I'm sure the telephone calls going through with, and I think we have to be careful with that. And again, I think social media and the way in which words are being claimed, it has to be countered with reclaiming what those words mean. And friendship is one of those for me. And I guess has been strongly so in a way that I wasn't, until I started writing about Irv, it didn't kind of pour out of me, for better or worse, because I'm not trying to say I know what friendship is, but just, to work with what is so important about it. And that gets to the next section about how unexpected, and I don't know if you had a question about that. The next section, I don't need to.
Oh, no, the only thing I wanted to say still about digital anatomy.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of the poetry that I think you wrote. These were your words.
Mhm.
Around the metacarpal bone, flexor and extensor tendon. You started listing all the things. I had some hand surgery, so I was kind of related as we're talking about the tendons. But I loved, there was like a rhythm.
Yeah.
So I think that maybe it was even that's the first sort of poem that we encounter in the book from the beginning. And then the next page, I like where it says friendship knows solidity as bone. Friendship extends heart to heart and flexes, does not break. If it does, it never was. It lives in the dynamic between two people. I thought that was really very touching. And I kind of felt like I was starting really getting kind of your frustration about the use of the word friendship today and trying to put more importance on a really good meaning for the word friendship.
Thank you. And going back to the first little bit around the metacarpal bone, my wife's anatomy from medical school was the place where those words and phrases came from. I put them in that order rhythmically only. That's Frank Netter's explanation of the hand. And in fact, Jeffrey's son, Jeffrey, when he didn't get a chance to read the whole book, he's finishing med school, and he said, wow, like, I really like that part about it. Oh, you went to Netter. And I was sort of like, yeah, I went to Netter, you know. But yeah, I tried to get to the complexity of if you can count all the friends you have on one hand and still have a few fingers left over, what that means. So that's the simple, complex dynamic of friendship that, again, is, I don't think so often not really evident all the time, or we take it for granted, or we can easily say, oh, my friend so-and-so. It might be at work or something like that, but, you know, there are those we can trust as friends, and there are those that we can like, but we don't necessarily, I don't know, they're necessarily friends in that way. And that doesn't mean I'm against a thriving community of, you know, people who care about one another, of course. But I think, you know, that's one of the things I was driving at with this. If you go back to the one line you read, Marilee, friendship knows solidity as bone. Friendship extends heart to heart and flexes, does not break. If it does, it never was. That is more in an absolute sense, because there could be breakage, but then 2 years later, there could be an understanding that's gained. And so it's not, I'm not trying to be absolute in that.
Yep.
And it may read that way. I hope it doesn't read that
I only
way.
read a little, the first section. I think.
No, but it may come off that way, but and of course, I'm talking about two people. I say it lives in the dynamic between two people. That could be the 8 of my son's friends. You know, it could be the 5 of my brother's friends from Syracuse, the 5 of my sister's friends from Northwestern. But so it's not an absolutizing of numbers at all, but trying to distill what I think friendship it really is, and how it endures and so forth. So
Can you give us some more information about your connection with prison ministry? I'm not sure if I'm using exactly the right word. I think it starts with unexpected. And it continues, I think, also to the next chapter, Festina Lente. So maybe you could talk about those two.
yeah, that's I go from the non-friend to, and I won't read this whole bit, of course, but I go to unexpected. Here I've been talking about the non-friend and people that, you know, who aren't our friends necessarily. We've got to be careful about, so we don't hurt them. And, you know, they thinking we're more friendly than we are, kind of thing. And so, but I didn't want the book to put forth a vision of friendship in a sense that it can't happen quickly, or with, you know, sometimes there are those friendships that happen almost immediately. That whole bit about, you know, friends at first sight kind of thing. I mean, this is what I wrote. Friendship at times arrives by surprise in unforeseen moments, in ways no words can touch, overwhelming either in awe or delight, serendipitous, unbidden, our world altering, mysteriously against all odds or overcoming all odds. So it can, and I've had some friendships that have kind of like you immediately know, even though you don't know. And but too often I think we kind of go there too rapidly, and we can be deceived, you know, first impressions and all that sort of stuff. But then I tell the story about Anthony Ray Hinton and his friendship with Henry Hayes. Anthony Ray, and I won't tell his story, you know, in full, of course, but 30 years on death row for a crime he didn't commit. Henry Hayes was one of 2 KKK. I was probably 21.
Henry wasn't on death row for 30 years for a crime he didn't commit.
I didn't say that.
No,
Did I?
I just wanted you to clarify.
who was on death row.
Oh, sorry. But
Sorry.
I love my wife. I'm glad she's here. And I'm getting sharper here. Yeah, no, Anthony Ray Hinton was on death row for 30 years for a crime he did not commit. Henry Hayes was on death row for a crime he did commit. He killed 19-year-old Michael Donald. The last sort of let me say lynching in the prototypical sense of what that word means. They strung him up, from a tree, and Anthony eventually befriends Henry Hayes, doesn't know he's Henry Hayes, just knows he's Henry.
Mhm.
And they strike up a friendship. And then one of the other guys on the row says, "Do you know who that is?" "That's Henry, my friend." "Well, that's Henry Hayes." And Anthony is shocked. And he doesn't know what to say at first, and then that develops, but he is his friend. So that can be unexpected. And that's one of the reasons why I brought this book that Katie gave me, Solitary, by Albert Woodfox, because it's about the horrors and abuse in our prisons. This is at the infamous Angola prison. But he and Robert King and Herman Wallace established a friendship that even when they couldn't be near one another in the same tier or tiers, or they put them in different buildings and so forth, but they were firm in their friendship in a way that, and he says, we'd argue about stuff. I just read this recently, but it's sort of my point about, my son and my brother and their friends, and they argue sometimes, but that's part of what makes them so close in friendship. So, but this is an extraordinary story about Albert and 41 years of solitary, 3 years in a different prison, but 41 in solitary, in which they attempted to torture him to death, and they didn't. And one of the reasons why they didn't or couldn't was because of the friendship with Herman Wallace and Rodney King. It's an astounding story.
May I speak up? It's funny, I was just talking to Katie, about how I know you, and I was talking about the group called Solitary, that John and I met at, and I was just saying to Katie, it's kind of a small group when we have our meetings. There's maybe like 12 people there or something like that. But I was trying to explain how, we don't talk about ourselves, but there's this kind of friendship, or I feel that way. And I don't know if it's just like when people have been in solitary, like the extraneous is stripped away or something, yeah, and it's funny, I had trouble explaining to Katie, the unity I feel, in that group. I mean, part of it is sort of spiritual, but yeah, I don't know what you think, John. It was just hard for me to define it. Or, I mean, I sort of spent one thunderstormy time going to visit a prison with John, who I'd never met before, and which was, I don't know, hour and a half ride or something. And, by the end of it, I just felt like, John was a friend, and I mean, we had a lot of overlapping things. I studied theology and I love literature, and, we both have a passion for this cause and mutual friends, but and it's funny. I've also noticed that in refugees, I did spiritual care with refugees for Jericho Road. And there's, and then I'm also an RN. I also did, that sort of clinical stuff too, but there's kind of a thing that strips people away. It strips away sort of an extraneous thing. I mean, and people can come out really bitter, but a lot of the people I met were very loving. And I don't know if I'm babbling or not, but it's so, you know, like there's kind of like, you know, work or you're in the kitchen together, you know, or, you know, I'm a nurse, like on a floor with other nurses or something. And some of those are true friendships and some aren't, but sometimes I think the circumstances, when you're talking kind of about primal things, you know, like solitary confinement, make it easier. And I don't know if you agree with me even about that or not.
Well, I do, and I think one of the ways that Albert puts it is, and you can talk to so many other people in prison for all sorts of different reasons, whether it's a maximum security or a minimum or, you know, medium security. In prison, you don't trust people. You're vulnerable to the point of getting hurt if you trust too much. And he writes about this. He writes about how we trusted one another. And that's something unusual in prison, to trust another. And I think that which echoes the little section on Anthony Ray, because again, there's a lack of that all around you. And so you're going to be vulnerable. And if you're vulnerable, you can actually get hurt by others for that vulnerability. If you wouldn't mind, I just would read this little section. He says, Herman and I were used to being apart, except for the 9 months we'd spent together at Angola in the dorm and in CCR, solitary. We had not lived together. We stayed close by sharing books, photos, music, and constant correspondence, passed back and forth over the years, and so forth. When one of us was on the yard, the other would call down from the window if he was out on his hour. There are guys who never get a call from anybody except the worst kinds of language you could use, threats. I mean, Anthony Ray was threatened all the time on death row, even though he made some friends. And so many people don't get visitations. Actually, Albert did. Anthony did. But this paragraph, I think, speaks to this part of the book, but also to this bit about friendship that I tried to articulate. Albert does it much better. But the extraordinary, mysterious, and inexplicable success of our friendship was based on something else. In different cells, on different tiers, sometimes in different buildings, and now in different prisons, our keepers would never come between us. Herman had my back. I had his. If I needed him, he was there. Not physically, but instantly. I'm not religious. I don't believe in God, but I believe in the human spirit, and I believe human beings have a greater capacity than we understand. Behind the pain, the betrayal, the brutality, and the disappointments, Herman, King, and I existed somewhere, unhurt and together. After we were moved to different prisons, Hooks and I wrote to each other at least. That's his name for Herman, Hooks. And I wrote to each other at least once a week, sometimes more. I adjusted, so did he. It's what we did best. And I think that speaks to friendships that last, is there's adjustment, sharing, and that caring of that person in a way that is elemental, primal, I think. And maybe when you're in groups like that, you know, the Halt Solitary, there is that, and there are other groups, and you could all name them, where you feel that closeness and that bridging connection, as opposed to, and this is something I talked to my brother about. It's in the book, as opposed to binding connections. Binding connections are family. You know, that's there. You're bound, and we know in families that oftentimes there's the bind, but not the friendship. But in the bridging, in the most, what would be the most desperate situations, really amazing. So,
when you talk about trust, it is such a key emotion connected with friendship and a lasting friendship. We also have to remember about man's best friend. And if you really want to know, it needs to have trust. It's that new pet, either the family, the dog, in our case, the cat. We have my mother-in-law's cat that was, she passed away, and she had a cat that was about 5 years old. So we brought him over to our house, and it's just, the bonding occurs, but it's that look of trust that they give you with their eyes. So I don't know if you want to say much about that.
I'll leave that section. I really like the poem I wrote about Nick's dog, Ellie. And Tom told me it was passable. So I think it's good. I'm happy with it. But I don't know what our time is.
You're fine.
Okay, but I want to segue a little from, because it speaks for itself, I think, that section. But
Yes, I think we can
but-
identify. Yeah.
yeah, and I have a couple poems that I wrote that are in that section. And yeah, in Wind and Silence, it works, I think. But I wanted to get to how I started that section. Because I'm talking about nature generally, if you will, the natural world as friend, with the romantics in mind and so forth, and the transcendentalists and so forth. And so, and from that, I segue to, animals. And I talk about some pets that I can't believe that people even have, like, boa constrictors and the like. That's not something that, at any rate, before I get there, I say this, and I'm doing this now on purpose to get to an absolutely wonderful person whom I love dearly. If a place can bring wisdom, because let me go back a little bit. In Socrates Cafe, which Tom O'Malley gave me, thank you, Tom, once again. When discussing wisdom, Christopher Phillips and his eclectic group of inquirers consider the natural world as follows. And so I quoted the book. I don't think we should only speak about wise people, another says. We should also speak of wise places. The Grand Canyon is a wise place. Whenever I've been there in the middle of all that solitude, I've been able to think wise thoughts. Those thoughts come from that wise place, end of quotation. And then I add this before I get into the animals section of it. If a place can bring us to wisdom, is that not a feature of friendship, a facet of the diamond that it is? And one of the great gifts to me in writing this is that I had a chance to give it to Sally Walsh, whom I mentioned in the prologue. She and Jack Walsh were great friends with my parents. And also I mentioned my godfather, Uncle John Adams, and my sister's godmother, Aunt Mamie Adams, as great friends of my parents. And I gave the book I was able to take it to Sally Walsh and share it with her. And she read it, and I wanted her to have it because she's still alive. She was 98 when I showed her the book. She's now 100. And one of the great joys of writing this book, I don't know if he said anything, but he was garrulous. I liked listening to him. But I brought up the story simply because I don't know what his views were on the Vietnam War, because it was still going on. I don't know how he felt about, those who are abused or othered in our society. I didn't know that. So there's no way I could have known him as a friend, is what I was sort of saying. But there's that, to really know a person.
Well, it's interesting because that's something you wrote about for this book. But look at how memorable that was and how you connected that with the word friendship, which is the word you're trying to.
Right. And I was just trying to clarify.
refine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And by those different experiences, the book together does a lot of what you intended. I want to say one other thing about that's interesting about the negative, and I think you said something too. In art, when you look at an artwork, I find, or if you're going to make an artwork, it is so important to see the negative space. So I always love when I use this as an example, I'm doing a tour with kids to tell them how important the space is, in here, that's the negative space, just because we don't see it, and how it really is really important to many things. And in a way, the non-friend, the experience, different kinds of experiences also come back to help, I think, say what you're saying about friendship.
And I think too, that the bit about Mr. Kowalski was that I was 14. And again, I'm trying to write a book. I tried to write a piece that would get to as many different ages as possible. And I think sometimes as kids, we can be confused about who is our friend or not. And as a result, sometimes some terrible things happen. Or not so terrible, but just traumatizing in a sense, not in a big way, but in a way that is hurtful. A name, one word. You're called a name, or one word is used, to you, and wow, what happened? And I never saw him again, but I wondered, it made me wonder, like, man, I really liked that guy, but I can't really say he was my friend. He was friendly, which is a little different.
Well, he was your friend at the moment.
Exactly. He was friendly at the moment. We were there. And actually, I don't know what your time is, but I was gonna add one thing on that,
Oh, okay.
if I could.
Please do.
Pardon me?
Please do.
Okay. And I thought I'd do this because she's coming. Shilpa Lahiri is coming to Buffalo soon.
Yeah.
And this is the book she's going to talk about, Whereabouts, which I just have read. And it's a gorgeous read. And we at Canisius teach Lahiri pretty well, right? And extensively. But at any rate, make sure I get the pages right here. Getting to this bit about friendly versus friend and the meaning of words that way. I want to get to sections. And I read it maybe a week before you called to talk about what we would talk about. I was like, I want to mention it because I want to, fan the fires for Shilpa. Not that I'm one to do that in any big way, but just a couple sections here, if you don't mind. One rainy afternoon, I walked down a long street lined with shops. I passed groups of people who've decided to loiter at the storefronts for a few minutes. Families, husbands and wives, teenage couples, tourists. I see some elegant women who behave as if they've been friends for decades and are having fun in spite of the rain. They succumb to a few pastries, even though they're always on a diet, and they take advantage of the sales. Years ago, this used to be a stylish commercial street, but now cheap chain stores have taken it over, the same ones found in airports all over the world. The word elegant there stuns you a little bit because I think it's a satiric passage that they may be fashionable as elegant. The Italian gets to our word posh, and she translated this from Italian. She wrote it in Italian, then translated it from Italian. So it's very curious that way, I think. Because obviously, as if they've been friends. And this is part of the point of my book, there's a way in which people act as if they're friends almost universally a lot in our culture, not all the time, but may not really be friends. And then she has a section, she comes back to this word. Actually, she talks about intriguingly, and this doesn't ruin the book for anybody, but she meets up with a friend she hasn't seen for a long time, a friend from childhood, somebody she really loves. Her husband is quite despicable, and you can find that in reading about it. I mean, she has them over, for a gathering, and puts out treats for the kids, and the husband eats them all. Like, okay. At any rate, we go to another section called At Dinner, and this gets to this contrast. A bachelor friend of mine likes hosting dinners at his house. He lives on the top floor of a building which has a lovely terrace that looks out over cupolas and antennas. It's a charming place to pass the time. And then a little bit more description of the apartment and so forth and so on. Almost all the rooms have a bed and cushions strewn on the floor and lots of books, so that at any moment in any given room, you can sit down and read or take a nap. I think a child would love it here. But my friend, an elegant and learned man in his 60s, never had children. I think the word elegant there gets the meaning as refined and learned, and contrasts so well with this bit about, these elegant women, not as if they're friendly with one another. And I think she hits, for me, it was like, I hear you. That's, I think that she gets to that quintessential problem of friendship that's Italian culture, which, and again, I don't think it's just in our country, though. I'm trying to say this about friendship either. So I thought I would just bring that in, and she's such a great writer.
It is contrast that helps see what the definition of the word is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I know there's a few more chapters we didn't cover, but I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I did wonder about the unending. I don't really know. What is the word? I didn't look it up. What is the word revenant mean?
A revenant is sort of like a ghost, like or a return, right? To a past time and so forth in a spiritual sense. And so, and wasn't there a movie called Revenant?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's quite a movie.
It was
Yeah.
quite a movie.
Yeah, and in that I'm trying to get, because I bookend the book with my parents, and I write the poem for each of my parents in terms of how they are here now with me and others they know and love and so forth. And so, but I was thinking not just simply of them in that poem. It's that sort of grief overwhelms us at all of a sudden like that, right? All of a sudden it hits us, as Shakespeare said, right? Then can I not, Nick? What am I thinking of? Then can I drown an eye unused to flow, right? In tears, right? Then can I drown an eye? I think that's something like that. I'm screwing it up, and that's wrong. My apologies, Nina. Then can I drown an eye unused to flow for friends in death's dateless night? And we get all of a sudden that sorry for the pause on my memory of the line from the sonnet, but I'm talking about grief here as a friend is what the poem gets to. Suddenly as any shooting star, she comes again, afire to greet me, grief that is. This my dear friend and confidant, true, reliable, passionate, triumphant grief. So I name who the revenant is in the 5th line. And I was trying to get to the grief, the connection between friendship and grief, and the continuing in friendship past this this life that goes so fast. And on that note, the only other thing I'd like to say is that serendipitously some things happen, and I know Nick and Jean and Mark and Tom and Jen know this by their own writings, but just with the cover. Like, I don't know how this cover hits anybody, but funny enough, I talked to daughter Kira about the cover and sort of, I wanted it to be
Yeah.
simple. I wanted it to be not, and especially for the kind of book this is, right? And we talked about the colors and so forth, and she's artistic, and we sent back color swatches, and she said, oh, I think you should do, you should, it was white and white. And she said, take the color of the friendship and put it on the back, make it the whole back. And ended up, we both looked at the scale of colors, and with her help, I chose this one. Well, funny enough, it happens to be lapis lazuli. That's the color. My father, and again, this gets to that binding friendship beyond this life, but my father had a ring made in the family crest that he designed. It's a beautiful ring, and it's lapis lazuli. I didn't know it until I wrote the book and we did the cover, that lapis lazuli it's symbolic of friendship, which was really cool. It's like, excuse me. It was wonderful. So
Interesting.
So I don't. Of publication, many of you know a lot more than I do, but there are some wonderful things that happen.
It's like the original publication of Ulysses with Sylvia Beach. And James Joyce went to a place where they make, books back then had cloth covers. So when they were going to do the first edition of Ulysses, they wanted the cover to be a very specific blue. James Joyce wanted it to relate to Odysseus and the sea. And I remember they found it in some place in Switzerland. And I thought those kind of details are they just give that extra connection. So I think, you pretty much covered the things that you would definitely want to highlight. I know we should move on to end this, but I just wonder what you think about poetry in today's world, the way the media is taking up people's time where they're isolated, just looking on their phone. Are we finding poetry is not having as much importance? It's not easy to understand, or is it the same as it's always been?
I think it's more important now than ever.
No, I mean, is it happening in society? Is it easy? Are the students enjoying poetry and relating to it, or you see other people writing poems?
I do with the students that I've worked with at Canisius, and I think the Canisius colleagues can probably say the same. And there's some who maybe don't want to do poetry, but they might write lyrics.
Yeah.
And that's poetry.
It's a huge city for poetry.
It is.
Right now it's alive.
Yeah.
And you can see it when you walk downtown and you see the writers, Eric Answorth's picture. Really, I know that guy. But there's always been great poets, Creeley. And I had a chance one time to introduce Creeley at a workshop or something. And I never met him, and I wanted to meet him anyway. So I called him up and told him who I was, and I said, I need some more background on you, because I'm going to introduce you. And he was very pleasant, and he said, I'll email it to you. It took me I don't know, I think it almost broke my computer. There was so much stuff in his background, and it was all poetry and words that he got. But he was, when you see him in person, he's just a nice guy. He's down to earth. And you know what he talked about? He talked about his writing, of course, but he talked about going to libraries when he was a kid and how the librarians inspired him, to become what he became. And it's just down to earth, so, but he's not, he lived in Buffalo for a long time.
Like rock.
Yeah.
Well, to answer the question a little bit more, and not to go, we could spend hours, right? But I think we're starved for poetry. We're starved for language that is precise and caring, and in all sorts of ways, in all sorts of places. I think the attack on the humanities in in colleges and universities, in schools, is absolutely deadly, and we have to fight against it as much as possible. I had just sent Mick an article about that daughter Emma had sent about what's not like something. The title is something I can't keep the title in my head, but it's about reading, and you know what's not. What's wrong with reading, you know, something like that, it's a New York Times article, and I don't have the title in my head, but and maybe Dory can find it, but it's well worth reading because the writer Smith, I think is his name, takes us through, in a sense, the history of reading and how important literature and words are, and how the assault on language, which gets back to sort of the inspiration for this book in terms of one word, you know, is killing us as a culture. And we need to fight against tablets all the time. We need to do this. And we know we're not being taught across the country to write by hand. Some people still are. And then we get into Chat GPT and all of that coming down the pike, and it gets to look, so poetry, yeah. And I think the only other thing I'll say on that is I think it was Sharon Olds who said, everybody is a poet. And she qualifies that, again, getting back to what does poet mean? And it's an article she wrote years ago, but that everybody is a poet has poetry in them, but they don't, our systems of education actually don't encourage the keeping open of that, you know, that lifeblood of language. And so it's like with kids who, you know, are in art or in theater. By the time they get to high school, there's not, we all went to plays of our kids in elementary school, sometimes into middle school. Then it gets to be a special group because kids go off and do other things, not the arts, right? And so I think the same with poetry. Writing poetry with students in classes is what teachers should be doing in high schools and in middle schools and primary schools. Primary school teachers usually do a pretty good job with that, but we don't give the sort of do that language, caring deeply about language, you know, that we should do in terms of caring deeply about language.
Well, I think this has gotten me to realize that I was at the Buffalo Prep annual ceremony, and so they were honoring different students who had come through the Buffalo Prep program who were graduating, and there was a poem read. The ribbon cutting ceremony, the Albright, not AK, Buffalo AKG Art Museum, a poet created a poem, and she read that poem to us in front of the governor and a few other political people too. So that was really neat. And I found these are two inaugural poems that I found out when Clinton was inaugurated. He had Maya Angelou, right? And this one's pretty famous, On the Pulse of the Morning. You probably know that it gave her a lot of recognition, that was wonderful, a wonderful outcome. And it's just that these are really beautiful, how you can, you know, buy these. And so I have it also from Barack Obama. It was Elizabeth Alexander, and she also read the poem that she wrote in his honor. And then it gets in the news and it gets some attention. So, you know, having books come out that have different ways, not just being a poetry book, a collection, it is happening. And I think it's good for us to support it and know about it. And the last thing I was thinking is, again, I want to connect with art before, in case anybody else wants to say something. You know, I guess I think young people are really good at understanding abstract art. Especially when I look back, like for my parents, it was very difficult for them to understand when I went to college in the 60s. We were, doing a lot more abstract art, and poetry is sort of abstract language in many ways. And so I think young people probably are maybe ripe for really appreciating poetry the way we'd like to see it be appreciated.
Well, and to your question again, to at least what I would finally say, I suppose, is not everybody's going to become a practicing poet who's writing and trying to publish and so forth. But again, to Sharon Old's point, they have poetry in them. And oftentimes that comes out in times of trauma, in times of pain. And anybody who's been a teacher knows that. It comes in the words. And it's maybe they're hidden, maybe they're not. And there's much to say on that, but it is Lewis Thomas, the great Dr. writer, who talks about poetry as the apex of human language. Mathematics there's 4 different stages of language development that he looks at, and the third is mathematics, and the fourth is poetry, which I think is very interesting because today's society would flip-flop. Well, maybe put poetry below gossip, as gossip is, I think, the first level. But he would flip-flop that, I think. I mean, he does flip-flop what society says today about mathematics being the most important kind of language. So, Dory, before everybody goes, did you get the article title?
Did. It was from the New York Times, and it was, I want to get it right. Everyone likes reading. Why are we so afraid of it? And then the subtitle is Book Bans, Chatbots, Pedagogical Warfare. What it means to read has become a minefield.
Even President Biden had that young poet whose name is escaping me right now, and now her book is banned. Right.
There you go.
Oh, right. Another topic.
Yeah, it is. But thank you both. Thank you, Marilyn, for being a wonderful facilitator.
Yes.
And John, thank you so much for coming this evening.
I'm going to do what Lee Young Lee does and other wonderful people that I admire, and that is they clap when they're clapped for, because to be able to be with you is just a great joy.
That's very sweet. Thank you. And please, thank you all for coming tonight and supporting John. And please consider coming back on August 3rd, when we'll be hearing Lauren Belfer's new book, Ashton Hall, and she'll be here with us. So please come back. And we do have bookmarks with the list of the other authors who will be in us in 2020. So
Yes.